This is an amazing series of lessons. We have covered 17 different lessons at this point. Today will be the 18th. And it is amazing the wide variety of topics and issues and circumstances that he is able to address and cover in these lessons, and do so with a tenderness of heart, an understanding of where people are coming from when they believe some of the things that they believe that are not found in the Bible, as he himself was an atheist up through a good portion of his youth and even into young adulthood. And we have many to come. Today will put us, is it 36 lessons total? I think today will put us at the halfway mark. Today he is going to finish up a two-part series that he started last week. And the title of these two lessons are called Which God? And he is looking at man's view of God in various different religions, and comparing that to the God of the Bible. And he's doing this by looking at what those religions say about themselves, about mankind, and about God himself, if they believe in God at all. So we're going to listen to this, and then we're going to come back and talk about some things that he mentions, and maybe elaborate on maybe one minor point that he mentions, and we'll see where we go with that.
Welcome to the Does God Exist video series, program number 18. And this is a continuation of the previous program. And if you didn't watch the previous program, I would urge you to do so, because this won't make much sense if you didn't watch the first one. What we did in the first one was we talked about why religious pluralism is not an answer for the things that we are concerned about in this discussion. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the light. No one comes to the Father but by me." In our culture today, that's not politically correct. Although I believe any Muslim, any Buddhist, any Hindu would maintain that their faith is the right faith. It's important to understand here that this is not an attempt to be intolerant. Intolerance is not discussing difficulties. Intolerance is being unwilling to accept someone else because they are different. And as I have said before, I hope this doesn't come across as demeaning, denigrating, or condemning of any other particular group of people. On the other hand, I believe the Bible and the Christian system is the way in which man should function, and my belief is based upon personal experience and upon evidence. I did not inherit my faith as a Christian. I came to belief in God through science. And once I believed in God, the next question was, which God? And what I'm doing here is that I'm trying to share with you some of the things that led me to become a Christian instead of a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Muslim or a Baha'i or whatever else might be out there. In the previous presentation, we looked at some of those kinds of evidence. We looked at the issue of clarity, that there is remarkable clarity in the Bible, that things like the Fog Index give us a way of evaluating and comparing the biblical record to other records. We talked about the fact that there is a lack of insecurity statements in the Bible. We don't see Jesus expressing doubts about his authority. And people in his own day were impressed with the fact that he spoke differently than the other religious figures of his day. The next evidence that I'd like to share with you is that the Bible is brief. And men are never brief. Do I have to belabor that point? Let me give you an oxymoron, two words that don't go together. Brief, politician. They don't go together, do they? Brief, preacher. They don't go together. Some of you may be saying, yeah, look at how many DVDs you got in this series. Well, I don't pretend to be brief. Men are never brief. But what's interesting is that there is a remarkable difference between the biblical manuscripts and the other religious manuscripts that are out there in this area. Do you know that in the Library of Congress, there are over 35 million volumes of scientific material on the creation of the earth and on the creation of life upon the earth? And that 35 million volumes is covered in 31 verses of Genesis 1. That's one of the reasons a lot of people have trouble with Genesis 1. They want to read something like, in the beginning, God synthesized deoxyribonucleic acid with the polymerization of complex proteases. And as a matter, they want the whole thing spelled out. And you can almost picture Moses writing that down. Yeah, Lord, sure. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't have made any sense to Moses. It wouldn't have made any sense to most of us. So there is remarkable difference. And incidentally, if you look at the Vedas have well over 200 pages dealing with the question of the creation of the earth and of life upon the earth. So there is a remarkable difference. Major events in the life of Jesus are covered in incredibly short form. The baptism of Jesus, 4 verses. The transfiguration of Christ, 5 verses if you count the time just actually taking place, 8 verses if you count the time going up and down the mountain. But this is one of the most significant events in the whole Bible. 8 verses. As a matter of fact, there's 21 chapters in the book of John covering the life of Jesus. It adds up, if you calculate how long Jesus was on the earth in the flesh, it adds up to be about 12,000 days. The ministry of Christ, if you add up every day recorded in the Bible for the life of Christ and his ministry, ends up being about 1,200 days. Something over 3 years. But if you add up all of the days actually recorded in the biblical record, you get a grand total of about 34 days. Now, there are lots of things that we might like to have had about Jesus that are not included. For instance, we don't know what Jesus looked like. Oh, I know you've seen pictures of Jesus, but those are just artist speculations. Oh, I know exactly what Jesus looked like. You know, he was 6 foot 1 inches tall. He weighed 240 pounds. He had yellowish green eyes. He was bald. Yeah, he looked just like me. And don't you see that's why we don't have that? Somebody would have their hand out, wouldn't they? Now, reading the Quran, you'll find out some of the personal habits of Muhammad. How many times he brushed his teeth. Discussions about the difficulties he had with his wives. There's one passage where Muhammad tells his 15 wives he's going to divorce all of them if they don't get along better. So it's a radical departure from this. And you can see the biblical writers frustrated because they weren't allowed to do what normal, natural things would be for a person to record. In John 20 and verse 30, we're told that there were many other things that Jesus did that are not recorded in this book. John would love to have recorded it. And he goes on in verse 25 of chapter 21 and says, the whole world will hold what I want to write. But he wasn't being allowed to do so. Go to the library and get a copy of the Vedas. We're talking 3 volumes, like so. Certainly no brevity. There is a remarkable difference. It's also interesting that the Bible does not contain whitewash. And boy, we know about whitewash, don't we? Some of our politicians have taught us remarkably well about whitewash. Many times people criticize the Bible because of the bad things that are there. You read about David, a man after God's own heart. And you read about a guy that had a sexual affair with his best soldier's wife. And when Bathsheba became pregnant, he got the guy home from battle and tried to get him to sleep with his wife so that David could deny the baby was his. And when that didn't work, he had the man murdered. You know, when I was an atheist, we had the idea about writing a Bible, actually, that was going to be called the X-rated Bible. That's actually been done now. Not by me, but by other people. going through and looking at stories like the one I just recalled to you and saying, how can you believe in the Bible when that bad stuff is in there? But that bad stuff is a testimony to the fact that the Bible didn't come from humans. Now, I'm an old man. Some of you young people may have trouble with this one. But back in my hippie days, we believed that John F. Kennedy was some kind of a god. We used to talk about the White House, and we called it Camelot. And our belief was that John F. Kennedy was perfect, that he never made any mistakes, that he had incredible courage, that he was perfect morally, never compromised himself in anything. Well, over the years, we've realized that John F. Kennedy had some weaknesses too. He had some weaknesses I don't even have. His feet were made out of clay, just like the rest of us. But you got to understand that when you tell about a hero, you don't tell the bad stuff. You don't record the negatives. You only record the good things. And many of us have found that our heroes sometimes were not as great as we thought they were, because the only thing we were exposed to was their successes and their strengths. Now, let me give you a little comparison that I think is kind of interesting. I went to the World's Fair when it was in Montreal, and I was given a copy of the Quran. It looked like this. This copy has been distributed to the press. It has been widely distributed in the United States. But as I read it, it didn't match with the one that I had when I was in college. As a matter of fact, let me give you a way of comparing this. You can compare this Quran with the Quran that looks like this. This is published by Penguin Classics. And you can get it at any bookstore online. You can get it probably in most used bookstores very economically. It's translated by a man by the name of Dawood, who himself is a Muslim. What's the difference between this one and this one? Well, this one has been westernized. What I mean by that is that anything that the people who were doing the translating thought would be offensive to Westerners attending the World's Fair in Montreal was taken out. This one is probably the one that some of our terrorists have been reading. There's a difference in the Qurans. Whitewash. And it's important to realize that this is in direct contrast to the Bible, where we not only see the good things about our Bible heroes, but of the weaknesses. We see Abraham on 2 different occasions willing to let his wife become another man's wife because he didn't trust in God. We see Paul and Peter having difficulties, Peter making enormous mistakes, because again, we're told the bad as well as the good. And the last point I want to make about the internal evidence of the Bible is that there are no superlatives in the Bible. The Bible uses objective language. And it's important here to recognize that as you look at this question of objective language, what you see is just simply the statements that are made are very clear and very simple and very easy.